Welcome to Northwest Arkansas Investing Podcast, your go-to source for real estate investing in Northwest Arkansas.
Whether you're a seasoned investor just starting out, we bring you expert insights, market trends, and practical strategies to help you build wealth through real estate.
From buying and selling to property management and long-term investment planning, we cover it all so you can make smart, informed decisions in this fast-growing market. Let's dive in.
Welcome to Northwest Arkansas Investing Podcast. Today, we have Dave Pinson on to the podcast. Dave, thank you for your time coming on. We really appreciate you. Are you based out of Fort Smith, or are you living out of here, Northwest Arkansas?
Out of Fort Smith.
Okay, out of Fort Smith. So we appreciate you driving up.
Absolutely.
We really do appreciate
My
that.
pleasure.
What we like to do is just kind of do a quick 30,000 foot perspective of like what you do, how you got into what you're doing, a little bit about your background, and then we'll facilitate from there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I've been involved in real estate, property management, facility management for about the past 25 years. And
Wow.
that actually started in student housing.
Mm-hmm.
Even back when I was an undergrad, I was a desk attendant and a leasing agent in privatized student housing, and stayed in the student housing higher ed field for almost 10 years. That part of my career ended. I was the chief housing officer at the University of Arkansas Fort Smith. Kind of helped them with their conversion from a 2-year school to a 4-year school and getting their residence hall program set up. And at that time, I went into the to the pure property management side of business, and that was at Trinity Multifamily.
Yeah.
Started there as a regional director. I guess that was back in 2011.
Okay. What, I guess, and we like to facilitate this too. What about real estate caught your attention? What about, how did that even become, like, were your parents in real estate? Was it you watch a podcast, listen to a podcast, and you're like, oh, I want to be in property management? Well, how did that look?
Yeah, well, believe it or not, I was back as an undergrad. I was going into law. I was pre-law major, and what I wanted to do in law was real estate law because it had always intrigued me. I'd known several realtors growing up, even in South Arkansas, and it looked like they had a lot of fun with what they did. So I was going to do the law side of it. I was really bent on wanting to be an attorney, and ended up getting that attendant kind of leasing agent job there as an undergraduate on a federal work study program that really opened my eyes to kind of that side of the world. And I ended up being offered a graduate assistantship at my alma mater, Arkansas Tech, and it was a pretty customizable degree. It was a master's degree, but I did mine with it was in administration, but I got an emphasis with student housing, kind of facility management side of the business. And I was hooked then, and the more I progressed kind of on that side of the business, there's a lot of red tape, right?
Yeah.
And I had the opportunity to join really a young company in Trinity Multifamily that had a little bit more leeway, and I could kind of express my abilities a little bit more on that side of the table. But I love student housing.
So with Trinity Multifamily, explain, you're with them right now, correct?
Actually, I sold that company a few years ago.
Okay. Yep. Congrats.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So you how long of a period were you doing the Trinity?
Approximately 10 years.
10 years. Yeah. 10 years, sold that, and then what does today look like for you?
Well, I get to do a lot of different stuff. Get to have a lot of fun. It's all real estate centered now. Is what I do. Either on the acquisition side. I do some business with a firm out of Los Angeles called Most Capital. Okay. And that firm specializes really in secondary, tertiary markets, small capital cities, growing submarkets, regentrifying submarkets in the sub 5 million space, primarily apartments. Okay. Duplexes, some SFRs, but it's primarily all apartments.
Wow.
I help them with their asset management and acquisitions, but really my day-to-day right now, guys, focuses around being an investment sales advisor, a senior advisor with SPN Oak Realty out of Tulsa. And we sell apartment deals all over the country. And, as far as the specialty goes, it would be apartments, but we do some commercial, some retail, everything from trailer parks to RV parks, all that sort of stuff.
Wow. Wow. So you started in as a undergrad, started and then went to Trinity. Would you say that all of this background, you have such a unique perspective from like seeing the property management side of things? You get to see, I would say, like probably some of the craziest stories, managing all this stuff. Like, would you say that gave you a really good base for like being where you are today? You're able to do some really creative things. Would you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely. And that's one of the neatest things about property management. I mean, it's an integral part of the business. You know, I always tried to tell people that we manage stuff like we owned it, because no one really manages a property as good as what an owner would.
Yeah.
That hands-on approach. The problem with that, though, you know, if we go out and buy a deal and we try to manage it ourselves, it really slows down how fast we can scale. You know, we're doing work orders, we're painting units, when we should be out looking for the next deal. So you have to find that trusted third party property manager that's willing to manage with you, to grow with you, and really to form a partnership. To me, that's what property management really boils down to.
Right.
Is the collaboration between the owner and the manager.
Such a key with multifamily and commercial. The team, like we just talked to TJ about, having a good CPA, having a good attorney, having a good broker is worth their weight in gold. You know, attorneys always, it's thrown around, they're worth their weight in gold. You know, same thing I think with CPA, and I think with a good commercial broker, but also a property manager. You know, it's built in that team. And I feel like from what you're saying there too, the property management side of the business, I'm sure you have a lot more respect for the due diligence on a property, like what you see probably from owners maybe who didn't do proper due diligence, or even I know we were involved on a couple of deals early, and you guys got, as a property manager, you got involved on the due diligence. So I think you have a respect for the unforeseen things that can happen. You know, there's some things in real estate out of your control and maybe unforeseen, but having that property management background, I think, is definitely probably been key to
it absolutely has been, because, you know, when you're helping someone like yourself, Brian, with an acquisition, you're going in and you're familiarizing yourself not only with the property but with the submarket and the market that the property's in. So it's education, it's real estate 101, how you approach every one of these deals, because they're all different. Each one is unique in their own right, and may be in the same city, and it may operate totally different between north and south side of town, or east and west side of town. So being a property manager, you really get to study that stuff on the front end, especially when you're included in it. So the acquisitions from a property management standpoint are probably the easiest type of deal to take over. But then on the flip side of that, you get a deal that maybe someone hadn't ran correctly, another management company, an owner, and, you know, you walk into something that's 50% occupied, and you're expected to make great strides in a very short amount of time. You know, because the thing's hemorrhaging, right? So you have to learn on the fly in those types of situations.
For our listeners, explain how y'all met in the relationship there.
Yeah, I mean, I could start that. I was buying multifamily originally in Springdale. Was my first venture, you know, 7.5 years ago. Before, and then I kind of started to run out of doors in Northwest Arkansas and started to look at Fort Smith. You know, Fort Smith got on my radar somehow. You know, and when I was buying in Springdale, people were like, "Are you buying in Springdale?" And then when I started looking at Fort Smith, they're like, "Oh, you're buying in, what are you doing in Fort Smith? Or why would you even look there?" And you know, but some of the basis there was just crazy different basis between Fort Smith and NWA. But we met. Trinity was recommended to me to be a good property manager in Fort Smith. I wanted someone local to the market. Trinity was headquartered in Fort Smith. You guys had experience in C-class properties, which is also important to me, making sure you had experience, not just in multifamily, but the same type of asset class and in the market. And we met in person on a due diligence tour on a 59 unit that I did a joint venture on with my father-in-law, actually. So he was out there, and it was really good. Like here, that was 6 years. I mean, that felt like, 5 years ago, maybe 6 years. I don't know.
I lose track of time. I would say at least 5 or 6.
5 or 6. 2019 maybe, or something like that. And I was really impressed. One, he had the CEO title at the time, or very close to. I think you were a CEO, president, or very close to that. And just the market knowledge was super key to me, because I'd never bought anything in Fort Smith. I knew the market, not everything on paper, but I didn't know what Windsor Street would be the difference between Sunset Street, or what Kincaid Avenue looks like, or what, that changes a lot. And we'll talk about that too. I'd like to get into NWA versus Fort Smith, for sure. But that was when we first met, and I was really impressed, like, with your knowledge on, you know, and some of those you kind of knew. You said every project and every property is different, but you have an idea of, okay, the roofs are the big expenses here. The plumbing is it more of an issue in Fort Smith than it is here? Something that you'll probably want to take a look at closer. Just okay, I know you had $20,000 quote on probably a property over here. It may not. Maybe it's 10,000 here or 30,000 there. So, but you have an idea of like ballpark numbers and an idea of the rents. I think. Maybe they were around 400. I think that property I think it started. I think a couple started with 375 and had 400. So you can imagine some of the units, and I saw worse properties than that too. Rents, and I think that was almost operational improvement too. So that's how we met, and like I was really impressed with like the market knowledge at the time and the process and knowing every aspect of it. So yeah. That was our first meeting.
Dave, would you say at Trinity, were y'all specialized in like bigger things? Were you taking over someone's 5 units family, or were you like did you guys do anything management wise?
Yeah, we kind of had it. The way I set it up, it was compartmentalized. So, for example, we had a residential division that managed single family homes, duplexes, fourplexes. For the guy that may own 6 or 8 units type deal. So we had a division set up specifically for that, staff specifically.
You set that up when you came on with Trinity?
I did, yes. And
Smart.
It primarily focused in markets where we had larger multifamily presences. And probably our biggest holding was Fort Smith in the River Valley, even up here to Northwest Arkansas.
Wow.
And then we had our multifamily side of the business, which was the big one, right?
Yes.
Where we had the thousands and thousands of units. And really, typically, the breakover between the two divisions, 30 units, but it depended on the market, on kind of which one it fit into.
Right. I would say, and Brandon, correct me if I'm wrong too, like a lot of our listeners are probably like in the, we got commercial guys listening, of course, but they're probably like either looking at their first deal, looking to do deal 4, 5, 6, up to 10. What's your opinion on property management? Because I have 10. And I'm doing it myself right now. And I have a lot of clients that listen to this podcast, and they're like from 2 to 10, somewhere in that range. What's your opinion on like, when's that threshold for like, hey, property is time? It's time. Is it personal or is it
one?
I say one.
Like get mad.
I'm asked that question.
I bet you're asking a lot.
No kidding. Maybe half a dozen times a year, and it's obviously it's going to be different for everyone.
Yeah.
Some people are much more hands-on. Some people enjoy it. Some people have a W-2 that's more flexible, So there's a lot of things that go into it. My immediate answer, though, is how's your quality of life? Is it impacting your quality of life? Are you missing a kid's softball game because someone's toilet overflowed? So that's kind of the break even for me. Now, I will tell you, as people scale up and grow, there's sweet spots that you'll hit. Now, it's going to be different per market. It's going to be different, based on what your rent rates are, what vintage of stuff that you buy. And once you hit one of those, that's a good time to kind of reflect and look.
Yeah.
For me personally, I still own the first rent house I ever bought.
That's amazing.
I still own it. So I'm almost paid off, and it's almost like part of my family now.
Yeah.
I probably hit like 6 or 7, and that's coming from an old property manager.
Yeah.
I hit 6 or 7 of them when I started kind of to notice the burn a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't like this 11 o'clock call.
Yeah. I started noticing at around 5, 6, 7 that like leasing cycles got really sporadic throughout the year. And I was like, I can't time all these up, because I would say, you would say too, like timing up leasing cycles are huge. And like, I had just had like randomly 3 come up, and I'm like, I hate my life right now. And it was only 3.
No, I know. And, vacancy loss, that's the number one killer in the business right there. And, you have to look at it. Is this company that I'm looking at, do they have avenues to get this thing rented, 30 or 45 days quicker, and it saved me $1,500 or $2,000? Well, if the answer to that's yes, then you just paid for it.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow. I feel like most of us don't get into real estate to pick up another full-time job either. And so for even like Brian's saying, I'm kind of on that boat too. It's just harder to make. Sometimes it's harder to make those numbers work until you get to a scale.
It is.
And so but if you've got a W-2 job, or a job that is the bread and butter of helping you continue to buy more units, and maybe property management puts you in the at a break even, I would almost say it could be worth it for you to be able to spend that time going to pick up more units. And look for the next deals and get to a scale where it makes a lot more sense. So.
Yeah, and there's the 80% capacity rule too. Once you kind of hit that, whether it's you, whether it's an employee, whether it's a property manager, whatever the case is, how much more do you have to give beyond that and keep doing all the other stuff you're doing, including your family.
I really like your answer on quality of life. My wife and I have a lot of conversations about that right now on like, what does paying an extra $1,000 a month do for us? And it's like, it gets rid of the annoyance and like, the call from the tenant, that isn't hard. The filling one thing isn't hard, but it's how many 2-pound weights can you put on your back?
That's right.
Along with all the clients that we have to talk to. And I'm building stuff, and it's like, none of those things in themselves are that hard, but you stack everything up and like, it gets really hard.
Yeah,
so
totally.
I love your quality of life.
And that statement comes from me as a parent and having teetered on both sides of that over the course of my property management career.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That quality of life was a buzzer answer right there. And that stems also to like, if you're doing it full time, if you have a W-2, if you have a business you're growing. For me, I think if it's right along the accredited investor line. If you're making $200,000 or more, you should not be chasing down one lease or two leases. That your dollar per hour is not, your quality of life is not worth it. So I almost look at that as what's your current income? I would almost look at it, not even a door count, but is that tied to your door count, or is it tied to other factors outside your?
You can be super analytical about it too. And like my wife and I, at the end of the year, we like to go, all right, what do we make? How can we break this down per hour? How much do we think we worked? And then like, all right, this year, we made a little more. So this and this gets put off. And so listening, like that is one way to go about it. I think even just taking like, how does this make me feel? Like, does it cause stress and anxiety? Some people are gifted, like you are probably a lot more gifted for doing those tasks than like maybe a me or somebody else. So I think boils down to some of that.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
Let's dive into a little bit of NWA versus Fort Smith. I've lived here my whole life. I have very little knowledge of Fort Smith. Like I've stayed in this area. Tell us just like an overview. I'm sure you've been asked this a lot, because you've dealt in both markets. What are some key differences in like the management real estate world from the two spots?
Okay, I'll start on that by saying, I'm not
do a whole podcast on that.
Yeah, we could, we really could, but not necessarily from a versus standpoint. And we've all heard the saying, "Rising tides lift all ships."
Yes,
right. Well, Northwest Arkansas is the rising tide, and you can see that from Siloam Springs to Joplin, Missouri, and Fort Smith being on the southern end of that. Right. So Fort Smith is on the rise right now, and part of that is because of Northwest Arkansas. Some of the other distinguishable factors, though, about the market is the 188th Fighter Wing and the training program that they have set up with Germany and Singapore there.
Wow.
That's created a significant amount of buzz in the market. And also the medical school and the expansion of that. Super nice area, what they've done at Chaffee Crossing. I mean, you could pick that up and put that in Northwest Arkansas or a lot of different markets. And it's really unique, really distinguishable to Fort Smith. Fort Smith's an old town, and up until just a few years ago, it was the second largest city in Arkansas behind Little Rock, and Fayetteville has since clipped that. Barely, and I think it will continue to do so. But Fort Smith is kind of rounding the corner now back to becoming more of a destination type market, just with all the stuff that's going on. I think I made the comment earlier, I've seen as much growth there in the past 3 years as what there's probably been in the last 30 years.
Wow.
As far as rent growth, I've been hosting out-of-state buyers in the market. That's not something that's happened in a long time unless it's a brand new A-class deal. So there's some neat stuff happening there. Housing shortage there somewhat too. Okay. Not to the level of up here. I mean, the markets, they're an hour apart, but really they're still night and day different. Fort Smith is more workforce oriented. Factories, think Mars Petco, Ream, all of that sort of stuff. So we're very good employment base. I won't say it's an inflation-proof market because no market is, but typically unemployment runs pretty low in Fort Smith. Okay. So I call it a dirty hands town. That's nothing derogatory. There's a lot of factories and a lot of employment base of that nature. And historically it's been a renter by choice market. Renter by demand, whereas Northwest Arkansas in some cases has been renter by choice. That's another distinguishable difference. But also they haven't built near the product in Fort Smith that they have in Northwest Arkansas. So I see a lot of that 90s to 2005 construction stuff, really pulling some nice rent rates right now, because even with light upgrades, because there's not a plethora of the new stuff and the variety of the new stuff that you have up here. Now, Northwest Arkansas is hard to compare to almost anywhere else. And that's coming from someone who used to do business in 22 states during my Trinity times with 20 plus thousand units. And even from the brokerage side now, we're seeing a lot of the bigger major metro markets, the Phoenixes, the Dallases, Austin's another one where, cap rates are ticking up, vacancy rates ticking up, rent rates ticking down, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And that's something that I haven't noticed here in Northwest Arkansas.
Yeah.
There's just a handful of markets that's really maintained its integrity through kind of this rough 4 or 5 year patch that we've been in.
Yeah.
So that's been neat to see up here.
That's a great point that we just did the Skyline Report. We had an episode of the Skyline Report, and we were like going over every like line item, and it was just what you described. It was like, hey, vacancy like went down, like, and in a lot of different places, and like on commercial and residential and multifamily, like everything's like how many units were built in Fayetteville, and like it still went down, like
It's also cool just to see vacancy rates over a long period of time here are pretty relatively low. And how does that stack up to Fort Smith? Our vacancy, you mentioned there's still kind of a housing crisis there and stuff like that in a way.
Yes.
Our vacancy rate's pretty historically low in Fort Smith as well.
3 to 5%.
Yeah, sure.
And they fluctuate from that. Now, once again, rates are much lower, but as Brian pointed out earlier, you can get a much better basis play than you can here. So there's give and takes on all that sort of stuff. Now, as far as Northwest Arkansas goes, I know several developers up here just having been in this market for a long time and that have built multiple deals over the past 5-year window. And 5 years ago, you could lease up a 150-unit deal. I mean, it was a record pace. You tell people about it, they wouldn't believe it how quick you leased up.
Yeah.
Now, some of the saturation rates have slowed down up here. They've become more like other markets, and they call me, hey, what's going on? What's up? What can we do? I said, now, this is just normal now.
Yeah.
I said, it's crazy. 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, you're still getting 10 to 15 leases a month on $1,600 average rents. And that's much better than any other market that you're going to go find. It's slowed down, but the end result hasn't changed any. Low vacancy rates, rent rates have maintained integrity, so it's still a great market.
Yeah, people were freaking out about the vacancy. Like, it's funny because the Skyline Report, Q1 2025, it's like everything is decreasing. The commercial, decreasing to 5.8, but the half before last, so I guess a year ago, vacancy increased from 2% to like 3.5%. Like starting to break down.
Sky's falling.
And then just another half later here, it's coming back down. And it definitely, for me, for Fort Smith, I try to underwrite 5% vacancy, and I try to get my economic vacancy to 10%. The deal needs to still make sense there, because I think there's a little bit more bad debt, to your earlier point about, we have a 376 unit A-class and Centerton, 376 renters don't all pay on time, and
that's incredible.
In Fort Smith, you better, for me, I'm underwriting for a little bit more concessions, a little bit more vacancy. And then also Fort Smith, they pay for the owner. It's more typical for the owner to pay water and utilities. That's something too.
You have to underwrite
electric. So
you can increase in cost.
Yeah.
So as long as you know that going, like, you just have to underwrite it differently. So you're probably paying less. Your price per door is less. Other factors are less. So for that, but that's starting to come back too. Actually, I know that there's been more utility billbacks. I guess RUBS.
That's correct.
RUBS is starting to be more
prevalent.
More prevalent in Fort Smith than when I was buying. It was just
what does RUBS mean?
Rental utility billback. So so we'll charge a $25 water fee. You're charging a $25 water fee. If it's individually metered, you could do it direct, but a lot of them aren't. So you're just charging a flat fee for water, flat fee for electric, some of the utilities.
Right.
Gotcha.
Dave, do you see in the coming years, or even right now or in the past, like people living in Fort Smith driving to Northwest Arkansas for work because of, like, is that a trend you have seen in the past and even now?
It is, and even still see some of it now. You know, a lot of the, you know, they're from Fort Smith. Their kids are in school at Fort Smith, and at the end of the day, it's a little cheaper to live in Fort Smith.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you know, if you live in Van Buren, Alma, or on the east side of Fort Smith, I mean, Fayetteville's 45, 50 minutes away. It's
not bad.
It's a real easy trip to make. So I do see a lot of people that still do that.
Yeah.
More professional type jobs. But then again, I also know some people in Fayetteville that drive down to ArcBest in Fort Smith to work. So
Yeah. These, and I'd love everyone's opinion on this. The gap between Fort Smith and Fayetteville, South Fayetteville, okay, 45-minute drive.
yeah,
The terrain in between that makes it hard to
very tough.
develop. Do we ever see that like starting to get filled in? Because like
I hope not. It's a nice drive. I love the drive. It's a straight shot. Like you can rip
drive.
it down there, and you know.
Maybe a Buc-ee's in there somewhere, something like that.
There's some Buc-ee's.
At least in Casey's, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
something.
Yeah.
I think for me personally, I think there's too much of Fort Smith to expand, too much of Northwest Arkansas to expand, like some of
To
these
start looking
to even need to go there. Yeah, maybe it does. You know, what's the one south?
Greenland?
Greenland, you know, their multi-vacancy rate is like 0 because
Yeah.
they can't build anything. So maybe Greenland inches out a little bit. Maybe Alma, Van Buren inches out. But there will be some point where it's undevelopable. And I don't know if any of it's protected or anything like that between there. Or,
I do agree. I can see Greenland to Fayetteville filling in pretty nicely here over the next decade, 2 or 3. And I could see kind of that Alma, Van Buren up to Rudy, you know, where the New Love's gas station is and the Hilltop Travel Plaza or whatever it is. I can see that developing out, but I think you'll still have a pretty good stretch.
Big gap.
I do.
Yeah. My wife was asking me that. She's like, how doesn't we, my wife and I would talk this all the time. She's like, this is beautiful.
Oh, it is.
It is beautiful. Like, cause she's from Tulsa. And it's like not beautiful, right? like we go over to Tulsa all the time, and we even thought about living there at some point. There's great things about Tulsa.
Tulsa's a great place.
It's pretty flat.
It's a great place.
It's not nearly as beautiful as that. And she's like, this is insane. I'm like, well, have you been to Colorado? But yeah, she's like, is that area ever going to get? And I was like, probably not.
coming back from Fort Smith, like through Fayetteville, that like coming over the hill, and you can kind of see the university and everything. It's a great.
It's prolific.
Yeah,
it's prolific.
It's amazing. So I have on here that when you joined Trinity Multifamily, I don't know how accurate this is. You went from managing 2,500 units to over 24,000. Is that correct-ish?
That is correct throughout my tenure there.
How the hell did you?
Yeah, about a 10x.
Well, and we kind of discussed this a little bit. You know, property management is so relationship based. Real estate in general, and there's a lot of professions that are, but you know, even more so in real estate, property management is so relationship based.
Yeah.
And you know, I went through probably seven of my a little over 10 years there, and you know, we didn't really do any marketing. I didn't even have a director of marketing. I was on the staff until that point. I think about the time I became the CEO, you know, I ended up hiring one, but you know, so much of it's word of mouth, and we really got our start in this market up here on the third party management side.
Wow.
And Trinity, when I started there, two gentlemen owned it from the Fort Smith area, and a lot of the stuff that we managed, they owned. So we always took the model of running stuff like we owned it. So
yeah,
we kind of all came up in a system where we were asset managers, we were property managers, and you know, we were used to the full service that Brian commented on. You know, when I came out and did the DD with him and walked as the CEO of the company. Yeah. So that's kind of the approach that we had from day one all the way through. And I want to say when I started, there were about 35 employees, and I started out in Oklahoma. We had deals in Tulsa and Oklahoma City, and then I eventually, just a short time after that, took over the Northwest Arkansas portfolio that we had. And about that time, the foreclosures from the crash, 2008, 9, 10, and at that time, Northwest Arkansas had been overdeveloped.
Yeah.
So there were a lot of half-finished apartment complexes, a lot of foreclosures, and I had a connection at U.S. Bank that gave us a deal in Centerton, Arkansas. Yeah. It's one of our first true third-party managing for other accounts, and from that point on, I mean, it was steady growth of 1,000 to 3,000 units over the next few years, and then I want to say it was about 2015 or 2016 is when we broke the 10,000 unit mark.
Wow.
And that was a sweet spot for us.
Yeah.
You know, and then we got up to 13 or 14, and I looked at it and could figure out why we weren't making as much money because we had more units.
Yeah.
But 10,000 units was a sweet spot. And
right.
Our next sweet spot was between 18 and 19,000 units. And when I sold the business, at one point we had 24,000 units, yes. When I sold the business, we were over 20,000 units. And I think it was 500-600 employees is kind of what we finished up. And that was across a 20-plus state system.
Well, bring us through the sweet spot at 10 to the 19. And why was 10, and what did you have to do to get that 19?
Well, to get to that 10 was relatively easy. That was my ultimate forever goal, was to run a management company that had 10,000 units in it.
Yeah.
And we had a history of, training people up, starting as leasing agents. I mean, one of my partners actually started with the company prior to me starting, and he started in the maintenance division.
Yeah.
And ended up being our principal broker and kind of my right-hand man.
Yeah.
So we grew through promotion and training people that had been there the longest. I mean, I had vice presidents that I'd hired as community managers, as property managers, 5-6 years before that.
Wow.
And you get to a point where you kind of run out of those people, right? So you have to start hiring people from the outside. And we had such a hands-on approach, such a personal approach to the management that, that process from an interview standpoint really slows down too, because you got to bring people in that are like-minded and have, same leadership qualities, same management philosophies, and all of that. So we hit that. You got to get to know them, trust them, all that sort of stuff. So, that through that 10,000 was pretty easy. It was profitable, all of that. And then we started hiring from the outside. And, some of them were good, some of them weren't.
Yeah.
Right.
So we'll say the growth from 10 to 19 was a little tougher than maybe 2,500 to 10.
It was from more of an administrative standpoint, because if you offer good, honest management services, you're going to get the business,
right?
Because there's not a ton of property management companies out there, especially ones that handle larger, workforce B and C class deals. Now we manage the whole gamut of stuff.
Right.
Every property management company is going to have a specialty that they're better at, whether it's A class, B class, C class, low income housing tax credit, HUD housing, or whatever the case is. So there's a lot of niches within the business.
Yeah.
So, I think, from a word of mouth, from a phone ringing, from an opportunity standpoint, from 10 to 19 was no different from, 2,500 to 10.
Yeah.
But from the inner working, behind the scenes, having people on the right seat of the bus, having the right people in place standpoint, that's where it got significantly
I love
more difficult.
The constant foundation to the Trinity model that you have is like word of mouth, personable. We showed up, and so it's like you guys literally went from 10 to 20 up to 24,000 units by a foundation of like, we're just good people and we do the right thing and character's high. And would you say that's accurate? Like a lot of that foundation and growth was from just great systems and processes and doing things correctly.
It was by forming partnerships with folks like Brian and these property owners. That's really what it is at the end of the day.
Relationship based.
It may not be a contract like we all think of as real estate guys here, but an understanding, that this is a partnership and setting those clear cut expectations on the front end. We did a lot of kickoff calls.
The old scope of work. Dave would send me a scope of work. I probably filled out 6 or 7 of those scope of works. He would send it to me every time. Like, what are we escrowing for insurance? Are we escrowing for taxes? Who's the point of contact for insurance? Who's the point of contact for lender? This whole scope. And the word of mouth was for me. I told the story about you meeting me on site. I joke I never saw him on a due diligence tour since then. He would send Aaron. Aaron was great too. Look, Aaron was just as good. But
him showing up.
Yeah, showing up was big, and that's all I needed in the first intro. But from there on, I knew hey, this leasing agent hasn't responded. I don't know if it's a leasing or my point person hasn't. They've been a little slow to respond the past couple of months. What do you think? He takes that call and takes action. Okay, maybe we need a pivot or something. Okay, won't happen again. So I knew from there I could just call him or shoot him an email, set the look. But you had the right people in place where I didn't need to do that very often. I was just talking to the people that you had put in there, the Aarons, the leasing. I wasn't even talking to leasing, but whoever's above.
Regional director, vice
Regional
president.
director, yep. There.
It's rare you'll ever see a great property manager without having a great owner. Because it is a two-way street. Oftentimes I see property management, they're handicapped to a level. Maybe they, earlier in the talk here, I talked about, taking over a deal that's 50% occupied. It's not cash flowing. There's no money to do anything with. Right?
Yeah.
You can't make ready units. Ownership has an expectation. I want 10 leases a month. Well, there's enough money to turn two units a month.
Yeah.
It's just there's a disconnect. So it's a give and take type deal.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think? I think just piggybacking off that, what do you think for you? As an investor, if we have a lot of first-time investors or early investors that listen to this. What are some big things that we talked about? A lot of that integrity piece and relationship building and stuff like that, knowing the market, knowing the processes. But are there any key things that you would look for as an investor, looking at, maybe you're interviewing a couple property managers for your property? What are some things there?
Great question.
Well, if I'm first time or if I'm entering a new market, my recommendation would be to, obviously ask around, ask the broker involved with the deal, ask your attorney, ask your insurance person, whoever may be involved that has a little bit more knowledge than you in the market, to get a couple of recommendations. And, I recommend interviewing two or three of them, absolutely. And, you've got to find someone that obviously you want to do business with, that you like, but also someone that can be, kind of proficient enough to get the job done, whatever your business model is. And, a question that I always ask when I'm looking at stuff on the Mosh side and we go into a new market and I'm interviewing property managers, obviously that's my background, so I know the questions to ask, but I always ask them, it's easy to talk about what to do when the market's going good, when the property's doing good, when it's in high demand and all that. But the question I want to know is, what do you do when it's not going well?
Right.
Because we're dealing with people's homes, we're dealing with people's money. I mean, there's other choices. Yes, it's emotional. There's other choices in the marketplace. There's all other sorts of stuff at play. So what do you do when things start going bad? There's 8 vacants, 8 renewals coming up. 4 of them already said they're moving out. We've never had 4 vacants before. How are you going to fill those? So I want to know how you handle stuff when it's going bad, because inherently it does happen sometimes.
Just love to be on sitting on one of those calls, just a property manager, just sure he's got the job, and then Dave in the background, not Dave's background of property management, and with his questions coming on.
I usually don't lead with that background. So.
Yeah,
I was about to say,
just a normal guy.
Yeah, just a guy who buys real estate, invests in it.
That's crazy. So for a property management company, let's say listening, or someone who's thinking they want to get into property management, a key factor is the relationship base.
Yep.
Very, 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 very big. What would you say are some of the common struggles you faced with on the owner, between the owner and yourself, and maybe hiccups or roadblocks that maybe an owner did that's makes your job harder?
Yeah, and I'll kind of talk about that from both sides.
Yeah.
Property management's a labor-intensive business. At any given time, on any given apartment complex, you've got the field staff, the leasing agent, the manager, the maintenance guys. You've got a regional director. You've got a vice president. Then you've got the financial arm of the company that's putting together report packets. Maybe the construction division's involved with an insurance claim, or a make ready, or any property rehab, any of that sort of stuff.
Can't AI that.
Yeah, there's can be so much lost in translation.
Yeah.
And really, you have one hiccup in that kind of that chain of command that I mentioned to you. The owner may end up dissatisfied. Maybe it's the leasing agent that was too slow to respond to a lead that led to losing the lead, and then the regional director didn't find out about it in time, and then he or she couldn't report to the ownership. So communication's key in everything that we do in life, but even more so on this side of the business, because so many different people are involved.
Yeah.
And I see a lot of management companies that become siloed in that reporting, and it's so difficult to effectively get out the correct message to anyone involved. And
How did y'all
speaking from experience,
Yeah. How did y'all effectively get that message as quickly as possible to each person?
My goal as a property manager for all the ownership groups, I don't care if they own one house or a 550 unit apartment complex that we manage, was to answer as many questions as possible before they were asked.
Okay.
And we did that through reporting.
Okay.
And with technology being what it is now, and being able to link up with with all the various, most of the various property management softwares. You know, a technology person with some talent can write scripts, can put together a program that can send out a very concise weekly and monthly owner statement.
Yeah.
So if I could, you know, I got to the point where I thought if I could answer 3 out of every 5 questions before they were asked, you know, that's 60% more capacity that my team has.
Right.
Because, you know, when something starts going bad, everyone wants to know what's going on. And everyone spends time answering those questions, rightfully so, but then that takes away from, you know, greeting the tenant that comes in the door with a work order problem, or answering the lead in a timely manner.
Yeah.
On actually getting someone in to pay money to lease the place.
I joked earlier about it being it's such a labor intensive business, and I was like, oh, you can't AI that. But do you see AI having a place in like getting messages back and forth in response? Do you see a spot for that?
You know, I'm pretty old school and all that, but I will tell you, you know, since I've started doing the brokerage side of the business more so than really what I've ever done before, it's what I do now. There's certain components of the business where, you know, ChatGPT, AI, all that sort of stuff certainly plays a very pivotal role in it. And a lot of that can be round one of leads, responding to online leads.
Be huge there.
The development of advertising brochures, you know, that sort of stuff. But there's a big component of this business that's still very people-centric. You know, you want to know who your manager is. You still remember how the leasing agent addressed you when you walked in the door.
How it made you feel.
How it made you feel, what the atmosphere was like, and what the environment. I think it does have a place, but, you know, to what level, I think that, you know, we'll have to figure that out here over the coming years.
You've had a lot of experience in this across the nation in different markets, and I'd like to ask for our listeners and even myself, like, where you see some of the most opportunity right now. I mean, you really do have such a great perspective from your background to what you're doing now to advising. You're advising people in the real estate field. Where do you see a lot of opportunity?
That was going to be my question too. Was like, one, what's your favorite market outside of Fort Smith and Northwest Arkansas? Also, if you could do the same type of deal, would you do it in Fort Smith, or if you got the same return, both are going to spit off the same return profile, would you rather do a deal you're in Fort Smith, would you rather do a deal in Fort Smith or Northwest Arkansas? And then a follow-up question after that is, what market do you see most opportunity outside of Fort Smith or Northwest Arkansas?
Okay. You know, I'm Fort Smith proud, love Northwest Arkansas.
Yeah.
I'm a proud Arkansan in general.
Yeah.
You know, it's a sense of pride for me to tell people where I'm from.
Yeah, excuse me.
And, you know, seeing the market progressed. I've been, you know, traveling up here and working up here for, you know, 15 years now. It's been so cool to see all the new buildings go up. And, you know, all that stuff. If I'm with your scenario, if I'm given the opportunity, side by side, same deal, I pick Northwest Arkansas. And I pick it because of the potential upper end sales value and exit of the property.
It's something you can't put on paper.
It's something you can't put on paper. You know, you got reports coming out, top 3 place in the country to live, cool museums, great concerts, hustle and bustle, Tyson, Walmart, huh?
Still not home to Dave Pinson though.
That's right. Yeah.
It's not. Maybe someday. Who knows? But, you know,
got too much land down there in Fort Smith.
I do enjoy where I live.
Yeah,
it's nice. A little slower paced. A little slower paced. Not you know, not as cool, but slower paced. Now, so I would pick probably Northwest Arkansas, in that just for the potential, because you know a lot of people, you know, looking at it through rose-colored glasses. Hey, I'm going to make $300 a month in cash flow. I'm going to make $2,000 a month in cash flow. I'm going to make 12% on my money or whatever. But few people think about the end game. And where you really make your money at in this business is either through the refinance or the sale of the property. And you have to keep that in mind as you're looking at the end game, and that's why I would pick Northwest Arkansas. If I'm going outside of really Western Arkansas here, we'll call it, I like Tulsa right now.
Yeah,
that's interesting. I do really like Tulsa. I haven't noticed the cap rate rise there like other markets. Vacancy rates are still relatively low depending on the sub-market. And rents are still going up there.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm over there once a month looking at something. We sell a lot of stuff in Tulsa. That's where my home office is at with SBN. And rents are still going up there. But I'm going to put this one ahead of it. Anything that's kind of in that 30 to 50-minute outer band of Atlanta. And that encompasses a lot of different cities. Carrollton, Cedartown, Cartersville, Marietta, Alpharetta, Dallas, Georgia, not Texas. You know, there's a lot of those types of markets right now, and as kind of Atlanta has continued to sprawl a little bit, and Atlanta's not overly landlord friendly either.
Okay.
Not comparatively speaking to other similar type cities in the South. People have decided to move out of there to that kind of that what used to be way out there. It's not so much anymore, but rents are really going up there.
Wow.
And a lot of these markets hadn't had any new developments in them in 10 or 15 years. So
The ceiling's pretty high right
more
now.
of a fish in a barrel type scenario where, you know, rents are rising very rapidly.
I like Tulsa for that reason too, because it's still landlord friendly. Like Oklahoma
It
is
is.
very landlord, and I had a 20 unit in Tulsa that it was Trinity. It was right when Trinity was sold to Asset Living, and so you guys Trinity managed it, then Asset Living did great. I don't own it anymore, but it was a great look. It was out by the Tulsa airport. Kind of looked like Schitt's Creek Hotel. It's one of my investors who didn't do the deal, but should have said about it. And I like to talk. You talked about almost like moving there with your wife, and it's a cool little market. You know, you got the uptown Tulsa, and then you got downtown Box and stuff.
There's some really neat areas.
What are some of the anchors for that market? I honestly don't know.
Well, you know, from an Oklahoma standpoint, that's really their only true millennial destination.
Yeah.
You know, it's a more eclectic market. You know, I'll compare Oklahoma City, which is a very good market in its own right,
Yeah.
more to like a Fort Smith versus Northwest Arkansas.
Okay.
You know, it's more workforce. You know, it's a bigger city, but it's more workforce. It's a little less sophisticated. Maybe, you know, rents may be a little bit lower.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. Older areas of town. Tulsa's really done a great job between Jinx, Owasso, Broken Arrow.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a
Bixby.
lot. Yeah, Bixby.
Did Arvest just buy the Bach building, or Arvest just made a big move in Tulsa? I don't know what it was. It was one of the downtown centers.
And there's more professional opportunities in Tulsa than other comparable markets around. And I think that's a big draw. You know, the young professional crowd there. I don't want to compare it to Bentonville, but maybe kinda.
Yeah.
Maybe kinda.
I can see that for sure.
I think there's a maybe medical school there with Oklahoma State in Tulsa, if I'm not mistaken, or something like that.
ORU's
gathering
great.
place.
Tulsa's great. St. Francis Hospital's great. They have a lot of really good things. I think I heard something too that like Tulsa's an interesting market as far as the food sphere goes, because a lot of I might be butchering this, but like a lot of companies before they explore other markets use Tulsa as kind of like a tester market. And
They do. It's Tulsa and Wichita, Kansas.
Really?
You'll see a lot of restaurants number ones in both of those markets.
Really, that's why we love going over there, because food's great.
The food's great.
Lone Wolf is this kind of Chipotle styled kimchi place.
Yes,
It's right by the box
just
center.
had there last week.
Yeah,
it was so good.
Well, and it was maybe 30 years ago, if that, Tulsa was known as the old capital of the world.
Yes. Yeah.
You would see license plates, billboards, bumper stickers, all of that. And it's hard for me to sit here right now and tell you any one major company there, because they have done such a good job of diversifying.
They had to.
shedding that old capital deal.
Yeah.
Now, Oklahoma City's done well too, but it's hard to get away from there. So I give Tulsa the slight edge in that.
Yeah, Tulsa's great. I mean, we almost moved back. My wife's dad passed away this past year, and we were thinking about moving back. And I was looking at moving to Bixby.
Yeah.
And we found a house there, and I was like, this house is like $700K, and it would be 1.5 in Northwest Arkansas. Like it is crazy. Like you can get a really good value for your home over, and especially just on the residential side for sure. Like your money goes a lot further, at least on the residential side. Would you see on the commercial side, like your money goes maybe further over there, or?
You know, I haven't noticed the cap rate compression.
Okay.
You know, so much, but yes, I think there's still some good basis play in Tulsa. It's a big enough market. There's enough professional management companies to have a choice if you do go looking in that market. But it's still big enough that there's a lot of small management companies and mom and pop operators still going there, which in theory means there's a lot of meat left on the bone for someone else to come in with a different set of eyes or a different management approach to go in and take it.
Yeah.
Has SVN traded something? And I thought I saw something in OKC. I don't know when the last Tulsa deal was. I know SVN's pretty. I mean, Oklahoma's backyard.
We almost lead the market at any given time in Tulsa transactions.
Wow. Wow.
It's it seems like there's a lot of units there, but it's bigger. It's hard to compare to Northwest Arkansas or Fort Smith. Almost a combination of the two. It's almost like if you took Northwest Arkansas and Fort Smith, and that's Tulsa.
Yeah.
Well,
the quadrants are so different of the city, from south to north to east to west. It's very different.
You come up through, coming from Northwest Arkansas, past Hard Rock Cafe, that right through there, and then you kind of see some more older apartments and
industrial.
Then you get to the uptown Tulsa, and it's kind of over by Trader Joe's, and there's some really nice modern homes, probably multi-million-dollar. Kind of reminds a Bentonville.
I drive through there, and it reminds me. Some of the housing reminds me of a Kansas City, the
Overland Park kind of,
like a Philadelphia style Kansas City.
I love Kansas City as well. It's just such a hard market for a first timer or even someone that doesn't currently own something.
Yeah,
it's just a hard market to get into.
You've had the opportunity to talk with a ton of investors over your career. You've seen wins, you've seen losses, you've seen people at the mountaintop and in the valley, in their portfolio. Let's start off. I want to talk about the wins, but where do you see investors making mistakes? It's a very broad question, so you can take it wherever you want it. But I think you provide a very unique perspective in that you've been on, of course, the opposite side. Hey, we're managing your stuff for you. They made a mistake, kind of thing. Where do you see them making mistakes as a whole?
Probably some of the most common mistakes I've seen. Every investor group has their underwriting sheet.
Yeah.
We've all seen them. There's a million different ones of them. They're all the same, but they're kind of slightly different.
Yeah.
There's one field in most of these investor sheets that I see that have huge total impact on the deal, and that's the exit cap rate. So I enter a market, I buy the deal, let's say at a 7 cap.
Yep.
But in 5 years on my underwriting, I'm going to sell it for a 5 cap.
Mm-hmm.
What would lead me to believe that there's going to be that sort of cap rate compression in that market at any given time? And if there's going to be, why am I getting such a good deal on it?
Yeah, why am I the only one?
That's a red flag for me. So I encourage people, as a conservative approach, to typically mirror those two.
Okay. Yeah.
And if it's lower, fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a reason why you're buying it at a 7 cap. That's the market, or something's wrong with it, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Second most common, starting on these larger deals with the wrong property manager.
Okay.
Because, all management contracts for the most part have 30-day outs. I don't like you, you don't like me, 30 days, we're not going to do business anymore. But even having the wrong company out there for 3 to 6 months sets the property back for a year plus.
Yeah.
In my experience. Because it's volatile switching management.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it is. It's typically different people on site. The new people have to get their arms around it, and the property suffers during that time, almost always. Now, there's cases where it doesn't. So we've got perceived cap rate compression, management, and number 3 would be undercapitalization from Jump Street when you buy the deal.
Yeah.
It needs $400,000 worth of work for whatever reason. I didn't see it, you didn't see it, or we just didn't know. We didn't have someone that knew the market on the front end. That roof's going to cost $180,000, not $90,000. Not doing your homework on the front end and undercapitalizing the deal. That really handicaps one. So if I had to pick 3 reasons, that would be them.
Wow.
That's perfect, I would say. Yeah, I mean, cap rate, exit cap rate assumption, choosing the right team, property management, and making sure you're undercapitalized for those unforeseens. But to your point, getting those numbers up front is important. Not just having, calling the roofer and having that in hand, talking to vetting the property managers.
That's right.
It's a lot of work on the front end, and it's true with investment. The investment side of it, you're on the brokerage side, which is super transactional. Property management was pretty transactional too, so you were already kind of trained up to be that way. But on the investment side, we were just talking to TJ before, but it's less. I got into investment just because it is less. I never wanted to be a broker because of the transactional side of it. I wanted the mailbox money to say, but a lot that you get to that point by putting the work in.
That's right.
Up front.
Doing the more. That's exactly right.
Mm-hmm. That kind of leads us into the next part, which is the best piece of advice you have for someone looking to scale their rental portfolio. and you said some of the bad stuff, which you could just reverse engineer that and just like don't do that.
Yeah.
But what would you say some good advice would be for someone that's 5 units, 15 units, 20 plus, looking to scale their portfolio?
Well, the neat thing about it, if you've done it once, even on a single family rental property, a duplex or whatever, the process doesn't change a whole lot.
Yeah.
From buying a 20 unit to a 100 unit apartment complex, you're still got an attorney involved. You're still doing due diligence. You're reviewing bank statements. You're looking at all the units. All the stuff really. Try to be same title company. Same insurance guy. A lot of that. So my advice to them would be make sure your tool chest has the appropriate tools in it. And by that I mean the correct people. Insurance attorney, title company, all of that sort of stuff. Also, make sure you're on any brokerage mailing list that you can. Any commercial brokers in the area. Introduce yourself to them because there's so much similarity in being able to make that next jump. A lot of people that I see don't do it. It's a mindset issue. And oftentimes it's because they have not found the right property manager to help them with that transition because they look at it as more work. And, where it should be more opportunity. Because once you start compiling units in a confined location, the economies of scale go up considerably from a purchase power standpoint, from a rentability standpoint, from a marketability standpoint. All of that.
Financing.
And you've got maybe a unique team that just services your properties. And you're paying payroll dollars versus calling contractors out dollars. I mean, there's a lot of good, economies of scale and benefits of growing that if you can do it the right area and have the right people on your team.
I love that.
That could be the theme of this podcast, having the people in the right seats.
That's right.
The right people.
So important.
Yeah, that's really good. Do you guys have anything else? Because I have my question I want to ask Dave. So we asked this to TJ. I'm starting to ask this to some of these high capacity people that we have on here that have, hats off to you. You've had a great career so far. You've done some awesome stuff, very high capacity. My wife and I were walking actually this morning at Lake Fayetteville, and she was like, she's a therapist, and we're always having these deep conversations, and she's like, you should ask these guys. And so my question to you is, what did you have to sacrifice to get to where you are today?
It's a really good question because as I've gotten older, I've too have become more philosophical, whatever you want to call it, and thought about that,
More in touch with your feelings.
Yes, more in touch with my feelings. We'll put it that way. And sometimes when you're in the heat of the moment, in the heat of battle, I mean, you're doing what you think you have to do, and in a lot of cases, what you really have to do.
Right.
But then you have time to sit back and reflect on it. I'm very thankful for all the people I've met, all the opportunities I've gotten. Very blessed to be where I am now, and having went through all of that and, made it out on the other side, still standing. But, that's something that I talk to even my kids about. I've got a 22 and 19-year-old sons that, sometimes in every generation says, that we point at the other ones, right? We walk to school every day and
uphill both ways.
Uphill both ways in the snow and everything else. But, it's more than that, if you make sacrifices today, you do what you have to do today, it allows you the opportunity to do what you want to at another point in your life, whether that's financially, with your time. And as I've gotten older, it's become more about time than money and other things in life. How much time can I devote to this?
Right.
What am I passionate about? But some of the sacrifices, I mean, there was points in my career where I wasn't at home enough. And some of my friends were taking all these cool vacations, 2 weeks and all that, and at a time, and I couldn't do that.
Right.
And my wife was, hey, why are we going here? Why aren't we doing this sort of stuff? My kids saying that sort of stuff. Now, looking back on it, we're all at a point where we understand why, but there's certainly sacrifices along the way, and most of it's in regards of time with people that you care about. For me, it was anyway.
I love that. I mean, I think that rings true, and even in my young career, I'll just speak for me, not for these guys, but even in my young career, I can see how that it is and can be a real issue in trying to balance running through the brick wall and spending time with the wife. It's a really tough thing to do.
It's a delicate balance. And then, the things we have to do every day at work, investing, trying to sell a deal, trying to close a deal. And there's also a certain component of it when you do get to go home of turning that off.
Yeah.
And becoming dad or spouse or whatever the case may be. So that one wasn't as hard for me, but the spending time with people was.
I think I'm coming to a realization that I only have 100% every day.
Yep.
And I was given real estate 100% every single day, and Tori, my wife, was getting left with 0.05%.
Out of all the businesses, I'm obviously most familiar with this one. The law of the lid. We've all heard of the law of the lid. You can reach it pretty quick in this business.
Yeah.
It'll let you know real quick when you've hit that lid.
Yeah.
And we all have one.
Yeah.
All different, but we all have one.
Yeah, for sure. Love that answer. Thank you so much. Dave, thank you for being on the podcast. We appreciate your time. I mean, obviously, just a wealth of knowledge. We'll get this out there, and I know it'll bring a lot of value to our people.
Glad to do it.
Thanks so much, Dave.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate you, Dave.
See you guys next time.
See ya.
Again, thank you guys for tuning in. I'm going to go ahead and list some sponsors off here. We're going to start with Flat Branch Mortgage, specifically Colton Kennedy. Colton and I personally do business together, and he's a wonderful lender here in the Northwest Arkansas corridor. Want to invest in real estate or purchase a home, but feel like you need a secret decoder ring to understand the process? You're not alone. First-time investors, house hackers, and future homeowners, Colton Kennedy has you covered. Colton Kennedy with Flat Branch Home Loans helps people like you break into the real estate market without the guesswork. Think of him as your mortgage strategist, helping you turn "I wish I could" into "I just did." You bring the vision, he'll bring the lending game plan. Let's make your first investment a smart one. Colton Kennedy with Flat Branch Home Loans. Contact him today by calling 417-437-0086 or emailing C as in cat, K as in Kimberly, ENNEDY at Flat Branch Home Loans. That's FBHL.com. That's 417-437-0086 or emailing CKENNEDY at FBHL.com. Thank you so much, Colton. Our next sponsor is TDS IT. That's T as in Tim, D as in document, S as in solution, I as in information, T as in technology. This one hits personal. It's close to home. My dad, Tim Stanley, runs TDS IT, and he decided to sponsor our podcast. So I can speak from personal experience. I've been able to work for my dad in the past as well. And they're a great solution for business technology. If you're a local business owner or even out of state, if you're running a business, need printers, need information IT services, if you need phones, scanners, printers, all the way up to, you're printing books to, hey, we just need something in the office. TDS IT is that spot. They provide the best in-brand business technology with proven, best in local service, and they can prove it. Our next sponsor is from Winstone Private Lending. This episode is brought to you by Winstone Private Lending, one of the top private and hard money lenders now serving Northwest Arkansas. Whether you need short-term capital for a flip, a bridge loan, or creative financing, they've got you covered with very flexible products to fit nearly any deal, including 100% financing. What sets them apart is their deep expertise, fast response times, and ability to think outside of the box to help investors like us close quickly and efficiently. If you're looking for a real lending partner, check out Winstone Private Lending. Link is in the show notes. So our next sponsorship is 1440 Photography. 1440 Photography is a local company here. I love getting local companies to sponsor this podcast. They're local. They do great service, and personally, I can speak that they do a great job on mine and my clients' stuff. If you're an investor or agent in Northwest Arkansas, you need 1440 Real Estate Media in your corner. They're not just photographers. They're real estate market experts, and it's the only thing they do. MLS photos, drone, video, Matterport, whatever your listing needs, they've got it. Everything is a la carte, and it's totally customizable. And here's the best part. Just book online whenever works for you. They confirm and show up ready to go. Fast, easy, done. Where quality meets speed. Book now at 1440photography.com.
If you enjoyed the show, make sure to give us a follow on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an update.
Don't forget to connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn for more real estate insights and behind-the-scenes content.
Have a question you want us to cover? Send it our way. And if you're interested in sponsoring the show, visit nwainvesting.com to get in touch. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.